Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the English with Grace podcast. This is a centralized hub for students, teachers, and English language learners to practice their English and listen to the differing opinions of other English speakers. The content and focus of this podcast will vary, and my goal is to introduce listeners to a variety of perspectives, backgrounds, and experiences as we discuss topics that are also presented in my English with Grace conversation classes. So I'm very excited to have you here. I hope you enjoy this discussion, and of course, like and subscribe if you like it. And I look forward to seeing you in some of our upcoming conversation classes. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the English with Grace podcast. Today, we are going to discuss learning languages, and I've invited an expert on the topic. First, we'll start with some introductions. If you can give us your name, your pronouns, and then your cultural background and upbringing.
So my name is Angèle Prétot, and that's a French name. This is my cultural background and upbringing. My pronouns are he, him, and if it's in another language, I go with masculine language. So, in French, we have a lot of adjectives and nouns you have to gender. So I use the masculine for everything to make it simple. And yes, did I miss something in the question?
No, that's great.
Right.
I would like to ask you a little bit about what you do. This is why I chose you to come discuss this topic with me. If you want to share your career and kind of your background in learning languages.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm a French learning coach. That is my profession. I have been teaching French overall for 19 years now. And for the past 7 years, I've been specializing in teaching French online to English speakers. Not all my clients are native English speakers, but most of them are. And so I specialize really in the differences between French and English and how you can learn between those two languages.
Okay. Did you learn both French and English simultaneously?
No, French is my native language and I learned English.
Okay. When did you start learning English?
I guess you can consider I started when I was 10. In France at the time, we would start learning English in the last year of primary school. So that makes it 10 years of age, more or less.
Is that still the case? In France, do you start learning English in elementary school, or has that changed?
Yes, they start earlier now. They start at least 2 years earlier. It depends on the schools a little bit.
Okay. And then I think you mentioned this, but where did you say you're at now? Where do you live?
I am currently in Vienna, Austria. I've been living abroad in German-speaking countries for the past 10 years. Some Germany, some Austria.
Yeah. Do you speak German?
Yes.
Okay. Any other languages that you speak?
I speak Spanish.
Okay.
Yeah, in France, you have to learn 2 languages at school. So I learned English and Spanish. Germans I had to deal with later. Also, my girlfriend is Mexican, so that helps with keeping my Spanish afloat. And I learned Esperanto and Portuguese, and I had been fluent in the past. But if you were to ask me to speak a whole conversation in Portuguese or in Esperanto right now, I would need some warm-up.
Okay.
But the other 4, I can do it if you start me right away.
Okay. Wow, that's awesome. Okay, well, I think that you will be the perfect person to interview about learning languages then, because you've definitely done it.
Yeah, I have done it.
Yes.
You could argue that I keep doing it every day, and that most of my work is learning languages because I always find, little tricks or new English words or new French words even sometimes. So.
Yeah, definitely. One more thing before we jump into the questions. You're a French coach. Is that your full-time job all day? You're teaching French, or how does that look?
Well, it's an online business, right?
Okay.
So a lot of what I do is not really teaching French, but things such as coming on podcasts or writing articles for my blog or making YouTube videos and things like that. So it's teaching French with a lot of, I guess, different ways of doing it. I'm not really teaching French right now, but the core of my practice is really meeting with my clients, either one-on-one or in the group setting, and teaching them French, yes.
That's amazing. I am trying to learn French, Angel, so I'll try to check out your stuff.
Ask me anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started with my questions. How can I build my confidence in speaking English or languages and overcome that fear of making mistakes?
Right, great questions. The way I see it, it's kind of two different questions. The way that I approach mistakes is that a mistake is an opportunity to learn. So if you are making a mistake, it's a sign that there is something you can learn there. Either it's something you've learned in the past, but it's not quite solidified, and you can solidify it, or it's something new that you get a chance to learn. So I like to phrase it like that for my students. For example, every week, almost every day actually, I correct some homework that my students have sent me, and I have banned the color red from my corrections for at least the past 12 years, because I realized that if you write things in red on the exercises, it just immediately means, this is wrong and this is bad.
Yes.
And I don't want to give that impression. So all of my observations, I do it all on Google Docs because it's online now. So all of my observations are in purple, and I correct mistakes either by striking out or by writing in green the right answer, trying to just, remove the focus from the mistakes, but focus more on what you're doing right. Because if you think about it, if you're speaking English at all, most of what you're doing is right.
Yes, absolutely.
So in any case, like if you had a child and they would do something 95% correct and 5% not correct, would you be so hard on them for the 5% they did not do correctly? Some people do. It's not a successful upbringing method.
No.
So don't try not to do it yourself if you can.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So you said you've banned red for the last 12 years.
It's been banned ever since long time before I had my own business. Actually, I was working in high school and I was just not using red.
Oh, yes. Okay. I was going to ask what your teaching background was. I forget when I learned that, but if a student sees just a sheet of red, it just is negative anxiety, and then it discourages them from continuing. So I'm so glad you said that.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then another thing that you mentioned that I really like to tell my students over and over again, if you are communicating with me and we're having a conversation and you make a tiny little error, I'm not paying attention to that. I'm just trying to communicate. So
right.
Comprehension is key. I'm not trying to get perfectionism.
Oh yeah, that is absolutely important. Actually, maybe we should dwell on that a bit more. It's important to focus on getting your point across, not on getting every little bit of grammar right.
Yeah.
Of course, there are situations where it's really important to get your grammar right so you'll be taken seriously. But this is a very small portion of the situations where you have to communicate. Most of the time, you just have to communicate and get your point across.
Yeah. And I want to use a point for learning like French or Spanish Romance languages. Some of my friends are learning Spanish, and I speak Spanish as well. And I talked to one of my friends about the feminine and masculine, and some of them are irregulars. But if I say el mesa for the table, you still understand that I'm saying I put the food on the table, and that one little thing, it sounds funny maybe, but it's not.
It sounds funny for sure, but it's not a problem.
Exactly. Okay, great. Can you give me any practical tips for practicing languages outside of the classroom to enhance language skills?
Oh, absolutely. My entire practice is just practicing language learning outside of classrooms, because there's hardly any classroom in my work. I mean, I guess you can consider the one session that you're seeing me as a classroom, but not even really. It's a coaching session. So, well, immersion is very important. I have my 4 steps method, which is selection, activation, immersion, and safe practice. Immersion is super duper important. I call it the daily French bath, because it has to be every day, and you have to put as much French or as much English, if you're learning English, around you as possible. So for example, if you're an English learner and you're currently listening to a podcast in English, congratulations, you're already doing it. So you absolutely need to do that. And then you need to grab every opportunity that you can to practice the language. Nowadays, there are unlimited options with the internet to meet people to speak the language, to watch YouTube in the language, to read books in the language, or read blogs or whatnot. It's practically the opposite problem now that we have too many options.
Yeah.
So grab every opportunity that you can and try to find options that just make you happy and make you feel like continuing.
That's great. Can you repeat the 4 pillars? really
Oh yeah.
quickly?
Okay, so it's selection, activation, immersion, and safe practice. That's four.
Oh,
So
okay.
selection is really you have to pick the stuff that is relevant to you. That's
Mhm.
really it. A lot of language learning methods are really not focused on what's relevant. They either use a frequency approach
Yeah,
or whichever approach they've decided to use.
yeah,
The way that I do it is really I define first what is important to the student,
great.
and then I teach that, right? So activation is the actual teaching part where we look at a grammar point that exists, for example, that you need to learn now, or you introduce new vocabulary. Just, the first time that you see something, basically, that's activation, because then that will help you systematize that in the other two phases, which are immersion. So we spoke about that already, and safe practice, which is the part where you actually practice speaking or writing. I call it safe practice, not just practice, because it's important to do it in an environment where you feel safe. If you have any reason to feel threatened or not super confident in that environment, then it's going to bring you not as good results
Yeah,
as it would. And not to mention that if it's really unsafe, it might bring also real life consequences.
yeah, absolutely.
So that's why I insist so much on safe practice in my coaching practice.
Okay, you are just lighting up the teacher in me, because one of the first things we talk about is making sure the environment is safe, which most
Yes.
people, I would say, in K-12, when you're learning a second language,
Oh my God.
not that it's unsafe, but you don't feel safe to take risks. You can't take risks to
It's
make mistakes.
Yes, I mean, of course, you can argue in what unsafe means. You're probably not going to die, but if you are part of a group of teenagers,
Oof,
you are putting your social status at risk every time you open your mouth.
yeah,
This is not what you want to be doing if the goal is to learn a language.
yeah, absolutely. So, oh, I'm loving this. Okay, Angel, how can someone improve their listening comprehension, especially when native speakers or non-native speakers speak so quickly?
Really immersion all the way. That is the number one thing you need to do. You need to be doing it as often as possible, because you have no idea how much your brain picks up that you're not conscious of. Like
Yeah.
the vast majority of language learning is a subconscious process. There's a
Mhm.
very small part, like the top of the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg. See, I just made a mistake in English.
Yep.
It doesn't matter. We
I wouldn't have
understand.
said anything. Wouldn't have
The
even noticed.
right. The tip of the iceberg is what you do consciously. The bottom immersed part of the iceberg is the whole unconscious
Yeah.
practice, subconscious practice. So immersion is super important, and then you can do specific targeted exercises to learn to find really little pieces of information. I like the way that the Delph is structured for the French language. That is very French focused. You probably have an equivalent in English. We have this exercise, this exam actually, that is called the Delph. It's Diplôme d'études de la langue française.
Okay.
There are all 6 levels, A1 to all the way to C2.
Mm-hmm.
And there is one exercise which is listening comprehension. They have targeted questions that you need to answer while you listen to a document that has been chosen, or in the earlier level, they make one specifically, but in the higher level, they just pick something from the radio.
Oh,
So
okay.
these kind of targeted exercises can really help you grab little things like numbers, for example. Like right now, my students are struggling a bit with numbers in particular. So I designed a couple of exercises where I pick something like a press article that has a lot of numbers, and I wrote down some questions and asked them to find those numbers, just to, help them understand this specifically.
Yeah.
But yeah, there really is no secret. Like immersion is the most important, and then you can do specific exercises if you need to be more specific.
Absolutely. Do a lot of your clients, students, live in a country where the language is being spoken, or do they have to find a way to immerse themselves via YouTube podcasts?
The majority does not live in a French-speaking country. I do have a few that have already made the move and move in France. It's not the majority. The majority of them are in the US and Canada and UK a little bit, and they have to find immersion for themselves. But when I work one-on-one with someone, the first thing I do is to create a plan for them, and it's a 3-page plan, 3 pages, No, 3-page actually. Bit of
Good.
English grammar that I'm still learning.
Love it.
3-page plan, and the third page is just links to content in French that I handpick for them with their interest. So YouTube channels, podcasts, that kind of things that are readily available online.
That's great. I am asking just because a lot of people, specifically some people who are learning Spanish in the US, well, we have a lot of Spanish, but then they'll say, oh, I need to move to another country because I need immersion. And I usually argue, it's easier, absolutely, if you have the privilege and can move to another country. But if you can't, there are ways to immerse yourself.
I would say it's easier-ish. Even if you do move to the country, you still have to make efforts.
Yeah.
And case in point, I mean, I moved from France to Austria. I learned German in Austria, and then I met my ex-wife who is German, and I moved to Berlin. And I thought to myself, okay, I'm moving to Berlin. I'm finally going to learn the real German, not the Austrian variant, because people in Germany were making fun of me with my weird French Austrian accent. That was interesting. And I thought, oh yeah, I'm going to learn like the pure German, the real. The opposite happened. In fact, ever since I moved to Berlin, and despite the fact that I moved back to Vienna, my German has kept decreasing. Because in Berlin, I was working in an English-speaking company. I was always hanging out with foreigners, and even the German people that I was hanging out with were speaking English, and there just was no situation where I would naturally end up speaking German. So it's not a guarantee. No. I have clients who come to me. They've lived in France for 2-3 years, and they can't make a full conversation in French. Maybe they can go buy bread, but that's it.
Right.
So yeah, it's really a prejudice that we have, and it's not helping you if you think you have to move to the country, because if you can't immerse yourself where you are, chances are you're not going to be able to do it in the country either.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you said that. I completely agree. And I think it's more about effort and feeling safe to take those risks and put yourself out there, which unfortunately is easier for extroverts, I think, but introverts can do it as well. It depends. Do you want to say more on that?
Yes, I'm a huge introvert myself. I love staying home and with my computer and, my books and all of that. And most of my clients happen to relate to that and to be introverts as well. I wouldn't say that it's easier for extroverts, although introverts do tend to think that it is.
Yeah.
I would just say that we have to use different strategies. That, in my experience, introverts are much more efficient at picking up grammar and writing accurately or speaking accurately, with extroverts being more efficient at just speaking and not caring about the small details.
Yes.
And because of that, the result is that extroverts will look like they are much more successful at the beginning, but at some point they won't make any further progress, at least with French, because want it or not, that just is grammar, and beyond a certain level, you have to deal with it.
Yeah.
Sure, you can survive in France or survive, playing around with the language a little bit without needing grammar. But at some point, you can't get past a certain level of complexity in what you express without understanding grammar. And at this point, the extroverts who have not cared about grammar from the beginning, because they just like pushed through and who cares, it's gonna work, they struggle really hard at this point, and they tend to give up even. Quite often, not all of them. I mean, of course, some of them are very tenacious, they make it through, but while introverts will have a slower start, and they tend to be much more successful over time, because they will learn patterns and systems, at least with the way that I teach, they will learn patterns and systems that will help them go faster, do not go further. In the end, it's going to be actually faster, because they won't have to, like, I've met people who were at this stage where they were stuck in the middle.
Yeah.
And they have made, like, through sheer willpower, been like, yay, I can do this, I can speak this much, but I can't learn more. And especially my grammar is completely broken. Like they realize that they have no idea why the verb is like this or like that, for example. And then when I get someone who's in that stage, I have to like practically break them down to build them back up. I don't like this metaphor, but that's really how it is. I'm like, okay, like here, obviously, like you haven't learned the gender together with the noun from the beginning onwards. So now you have to relearn them all.
Yeah.
That's going to take you a lot of time. If you learn them from the ground up, it's easier. There's a way of learning that is much more efficient if you do it step by step, even though it appears to be more effort, I guess, at the beginning. And introverts are better at that.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, I'm so glad that you said that. And I can speak from experience there. I am much more extroverted, and I was always the one ordering when we go out to eat in Spain, and I was trying to make Spanish friends. And then I got to that intermediate plateau where I could not learn the subjunctive. I hate the subjunctive in Spanish. It's so difficult. And then it took me a lot longer than some of my friends who were more focused on that grammar point.
So we all hate the subjunctive in Spanish, in French. Yeah, I feel you.
I know. Most of my friends who speak Spanish don't know what it is. I'm like, oh, how nice that you don't even have to learn it.
I know, which is why my girlfriend can't explain to me why it's wrong when I speak.
I know. She's like, you're just saying it wrong.
But why?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Definitely. Okay. Another thing we talk about, a lot of my students are at the intermediate or advanced level, so we discuss idioms and expressions.
Yes.
Do you have any advice on how I could effectively use idioms and expressions in my conversations to sound more natural? Or do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I find that a way that helps with idiom is, and it helps with vocabulary and speaking in general, is the idea of learning in chunks. So rather than learning one word at a time, or one noun and an article, which is already better, learn a chunk, one article, one noun, one adjective, or learn the verb in a sentence, for example, that makes sense. And if you're already used to doing that with the chunks that have a more literal meaning, it's a lot easier to learn a chunk that's actually an idiom.
Right.
If you learn, for example, with a translation, you write your chunk and you write the translation, you can just as well write the idiom and the corresponding idiom, if there is one, or the corresponding meaning, and it works just the same.
Yeah, definitely. To give an example, you said the tip of the iceberg earlier.
Yes.
So you're saying instead of learning tip, iceberg, all of that separately,
right,
you would, or maybe you're learning the word iceberg and then you can find the expression that goes with that or something like that.
Yes, for example. So in the case of the tip of the iceberg, if I translate it into French, it becomes quite different. It's la partie émergée de l'iceberg.
Okay.
Pretty different. It's not le dessus de l'iceberg or whatever. So la partie émergée de l'iceberg.
Yeah.
And so if you come across once the expression tip of the iceberg, then you can write it as partie émergée de l'iceberg or vice versa.
Yeah.
And of course, you might learn tip of the iceberg together with iceberg if that makes sense. Like if it's the first time you find the word iceberg, of course, you can also learn that expression.
Yeah. Okay, that's great.
And a thing that you can do also, like if you're really interested in idioms, is to just seek them out, because you have no idea how many websites just compile them.
Yeah.
You can find them.
Absolutely.
Even with translations into, like if you're learning English, translations in your native language. Yeah.
For sure. Does French use idioms as much as the English language?
Oh, yeah. Maybe more. I don't know. So many.
Once you start, and then it's really fun when you get to that level of language where you understand what people are saying, but you have to ask what it means, and then you can talk about it. So that's also a lot of fun. Okay, I have one more question for you before we get to the quote or idiom related to our topic. What would you say to someone who wants to improve their English pronunciation and reduce their accent? And you are the perfect person to ask this question to.
Is it a compliment on my accent?
Well, we all have an accent, but a lot of my students are trying to get rid of their accent, and I try to encourage them not to and explain. So I would love to hear what you have to say about that.
Yes. Okay, I absolutely agree with you that getting rid of your accent is most often not the right target. Now, don't get me wrong. There are cases where your accent will be an issue, but in most situations, it's actually kind of nice to have an accent. Like I try to really teach my client that what they want is not to transform into a native, but be the same person that they are with an additional skill, which is really different. So if you are, for example, like a lot of my clients are American women. If you're an American lady, which is like, has culture and a profession, and you're like this kind of like, you have this existing personality, really, like identity even, why would you strip that away? It took you 4 or 5 decades to build that. You want to throw it all away just to adopt a French accent? That does not really make any sense. What you do want, however, is for your pronunciation to be good enough that you'll be always understood. So that is really a difference. Like if your pronunciation is good enough that everybody understands them and it does not interrupt the flow of conversation, you don't care that you have an accent, which I hope is the situation that I'm at right now. You could even say that my accent is part of my personality or my brand image. I'm a French learning coach. Part of my work is that I'm a French native and I know the French language very well. And the fact that I have learned English, and you can tell that I have learned it because I don't sound like a native. I sound like I am French, but just a good English speaker with a French background. That really helps show that what I have done. And it's even an argument to trust me, basically, to trust that I have indeed built expertise in this area. So of course, for yourself, you have to think of how does that apply to you. But in most cases, you will be better off having a slight accent than pretending you're a native and having people just not believe you about all the experience in the background that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that you mentioned it's a skill that you are adding. So it's just proving you speak more than one language, which is amazing.
Yes.
So I'm always fighting the accent reduction, and I agree you need to be able to comprehend the person.
Yes.
But the worst thing you're going to hear is, what did you say? Or can you repeat that? And I'm not trying to, one other thing I wanted to mention though is I know some people do have bad experiences with it, but I always say that says more about that person than it does about you, and to just keep moving forward if you do have a bad experience with it.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you pardon my French, I mean, there are assholes in every country.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Like, and if it wouldn't be for your accent, it would be for something else. Like, let's be clear. If you start deciding to give in to everybody's demand, it never ends.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you have to draw the line somewhere. And it is true that there are situations that, unfortunately, a particular accent will stop you from getting a job, for example.
Yeah, right.
That is, however, a relatively rare situation that only some people will encounter. That does not apply to the vast majority of language learners.
Absolutely. We'll have to do another episode on, I believe the title of that is linguicism. Have you heard that before?
Linguicism.
Yeah, so like any ism.
Is it like racism, but for languages?
Yeah, and for accents.
I don't know the term, but I can speak about it a lot. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I would love to interview you about that. That's one thing that I'm really interested in, that topic, and it is absolutely a problem, and we can dive into that further and just keep this one to learning languages.
Yes, I would complain a lot about Austria if you interview me about that.
Oh yeah. All right, we'll save it for the next one.
Yes.
Okay. Well, you've made it to the end of the podcast. And the last part is always a quote, an idiom, or an expression related to today's topic, or you can just do one that you enjoy or you think my listeners might enjoy.
Let me think. Okay, let's go with, that's an English idiom, but jack of all trades, master of none, often better than master of one.
Oh, great. Okay, repeat it one more time.
Jack of all trades, master of none, often better than master of one.
Perfect.
And it's very important to not forget the end, right? Because it's better if you master, or not master, maybe. If you can speak several languages, you probably will be better off, or at least a more rounded up, can you say that? Round up human? A more
well-rounded?
Well-rounded, that's the word. A more well-rounded human than if you speak only one language and you never have any experience beyond that one language.
Yeah, that's perfect. Perfect for today too. Does that translate to French directly, or is there another one?
No, not really. We don't. Maybe we do. I'm gonna give you a French one that will be perfect for that. Esprit de l'escalier. It's not something that most French people use. I think it's a bit old-fashioned now, but some of my students love it because it means the spirit of the stairs. And that's the situation where when you have left the conversation, later on, you think, oh, I should have said that.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm practically guaranteed that it will happen to me, because I'm sure that in French, there's some equivalent, or not an exact one-to-one of, that idiom, but it's not coming to me right now. And probably you'll get an email tomorrow or next month. Like, hey, by the way,
Yeah,
that's how
by the
you
way,
say it.
I remembered it. I know. The spirit of the
Yes,
stairs.
yes.
Oh, okay, I love that. And that
It's
happens
when
to me
you
all the time.
it happens so much, right?
Yep. That's great. Okay, and then one last thing, where can my listeners find you? Can I put anything in the podcast description? I do have people who want to learn French, so I'll send them your way, but how can we find you?
Absolutely. So I have a website, frenchfluency.net. You will find everything you want on that website. I have a blog with a lot of information about language learning.
Great.
Almost all of it is applicable to English as well, and it is in English. So for your immersion practice, don't hesitate to read my blog. And if you want to learn French, you will find links. You can book a call with me to discuss it if you're interested in a coaching program. And also you can find me on social media with @FrenchFluency. On YouTube, I have a lot of videos about this topic. Most of them are in English. Almost all of them are in English.
Okay.
So, yeah, absolutely welcome to check out my content and reach out to me if you're interested.
Oh, we absolutely will. I know I will because I'm actually trying to learn French, so this is perfect.
Sure.
But Angel, this has been amazing. It was super fun interviewing you, and I do hope you'll come back for linguicism. I think that would be fun.
Anytime. Thank you for having me.
All right, everyone. Thanks again for joining us for another episode of the English with Grace podcast. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did like this episode, please go ahead and like and subscribe and keep an eye out for more episodes coming soon.